The black race is a slave, pure and simple, an economic slave. Wow, okay. Those are the highly provocative, totally uncompromising words of author Chika Onyeani. We're starting right out of the gate with this quote today because, frankly, it instantly establishes the aggressive, unvarnished tone of the source material we're diving into. Onyeani doesn't pull any punches here. His goal isn't to comfort, it's to relentlessly challenge his readers. And that really brings us to a massive, systemic paradox that the author explores deeply. Why does a continent like Africa and a global diaspora that is so rich in natural resources, brainpower, and culture remain completely economically dependent? I mean, how can a land literally sitting on the world's most valuable gold, oil, and diamonds be universally classified as the poorest? It's a heavy question. So welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're impartially unpacking the highly charged economic theories, the deep historical frustrations, and the psychological critiques presented in Chika Onyeani's controversial text, The Capitalist Nigger. Now, our goal here is absolutely not to endorse or reject these viewpoints. Instead, we want to clearly map out the author's arguments regarding long-term wealth creation, systemic dependency, and the massive mindset shift that he believes is absolutely critical for survival. Okay, let's dive right into this. Here is how we're going to structure today's explainer. First, the paradox of wealth. Second, consumers instead of producers. Third, the trap of dependency. Fourth, the illusion of success. Fifth, the spider web doctrine. And finally, number 6, a new economic mindset.
All right, section 1, the paradox of wealth. Let's look at resources versus reality. To really illustrate this paradox, the text points to a staggering number, $375 billion. That was the debt African nations owed to the Western world at the time of this writing. Onyeani expresses intense frustration here, noting that this massive amount of borrowed capital wasn't poured into critical infrastructure, things like reliable electricity, modern roads, or clean drinking water. Instead, he argues, it often just funded the lavish, imported lifestyles of a corrupt political elite who basically treat their nation's treasuries as personal bank accounts.
The author presents a pretty bitter reality check on this point. Possessing resources means absolutely nothing if you don't actually control the means to extract, refine, and monetize them. Think about it. Africa possesses gold, diamonds, and uranium, yet it remains the poorest continent globally. And the diaspora is highly educated. In fact, the text cites African immigrants as the most educated immigrant group in the US. Yet there's a distinct lack of industrial ownership. Onyeani argues that a degree is essentially meaningless if it's just used to become a well-paid employee in someone else's economic engine, rather than building your own. Moving right along to section 2, consumers instead of producers. Let's talk about the manufacturing gap. Onyeani draws a really sharp contrast here between how wealth is squandered versus how it's actually built. A consumer mindset, he says, focuses heavily on status symbols, buying top-of-the-line imported luxury cars like BMWs and Mercedes, or the absolute newest electronics and designer clothing. A producer mindset, on the other hand, that's about owning the factories that build those cars, owning the distribution networks that move them, and the infrastructure that powers them. True capitalists, the author notes, don't show off their wealth, they compound it. And this brilliantly illustrates his core point. Intense brand loyalty without actual ownership just directly enriches other groups. The text highlights how African communities spend billions on foreign electronics, yet there's a distinct lack of Black-owned manufacturing bases to produce even the simplest components of these devices. By simply consuming, he argues, the community is constantly bleeding its wealth outward. Which brings us to section 3, the trap of dependency. Let's look at the oil paradox. Onyeani uses the oil industry, specifically in Nigeria, as the perfect step-by-step visual of what lacking the means of production actually looks like in practice. Step 1, foreign companies are brought in to survey and find the oil. Step 2, because local infrastructure is lacking, foreigners are contracted to extract it, paying pennies on the dollar for the crude. Step 3, that crude oil is shipped all the way to foreign countries just to be refined. And finally, step 4, African nations, despite being massive oil producers themselves, end up buying back the refined gasoline at a massive premium. It's wild. The author even notes that the revenues of just 4 foreign oil companies almost outstrip the revenues of all 50 sub-Saharan African countries combined. He traces this systemic dependency on a historical timeline. In the 17th century, millions were lost to the physical bondage of the transatlantic slave trade. Then, in the 1960s, a wave of political independence swept across Africa, bringing a lot of hope.
But by the 21st century, the author argues, that political independence proved completely hollow because it was simply replaced by total economic reliance on former colonizers for everything from technology to basic infrastructure. To Onyeani, physical slavery just evolved into economic slavery. Let's transition over to Section 4, the illusion of success and the psychological barriers involved. So Onyeani has utter disdain for what he calls the blame game. Now, he absolutely acknowledges historical atrocities and systemic racism, for sure, but he argues that blaming colonizers, the IMF, or other groups for current hardships is ultimately just a paralyzing excuse. Instead, he aggressively demands total accountability. He urges his readers to operate as economic warriors, meaning you accept absolute responsibility for your community's financial destiny, completely regardless of how unfair the playing field might be. But to become this warrior, you have to drop the illusions of success. The text lists several of these major distractions. First, measuring your worth by the badge on your imported car. Then, moving out of your community and into a different neighborhood at the very first sign of wealth. Onyeani says this just drains the community of capital and role models. Next is spending billions to hold conventions in venues owned by others, rather than building your own convention centers. And finally, educating the elite in soft, non-practical fields rather than hard sciences, technology, and engineering. So, the crucial point is Section 5, the spider web doctrine, trapping the dollar. Onyeani clearly defines this visual metaphor, and it's really the core of his solution. The spider web doctrine is an economic strategy where any money that enters a community is trapped there. Think of a spider whose web catches a fly and just doesn't let it escape. A community must ensure that a dollar earned within it is spent within it. It has to circulate internally among owned businesses, actively preventing capital from leaking out to enrich outside communities. And he points to other communities as real-world blueprints for this doctrine. He admires how East Indian immigrants pool their resources, live frugally in shared quarters, and methodically take over specific sectors, like the motel, gas station, and newsstand industries. He highlights Jewish communities utilizing intense intellectual networks in solidarity to build formidable financial and real estate power. And he points to Chinese immigrants establishing widespread, unquestioned control over niche markets like local produce and dining. Basically, they trap the dollar. Which takes us to our final section, Section 6, a new economic mindset, the predator mindset. Let's see how all this builds to Onyeani's call for adopting what he terms a predator mindset. Now, in his vocabulary, this definitely does not mean violence. It means dropping the victim complex entirely. It means ruthlessly pursuing excellence and matching the brainpower and the do-or-die tenacity of historical conquerors. It means studying the systems of those who currently control global wealth, legally adopting their successful financial methods, and then executing them with absolute iron discipline. Which brings us to a closing thought directly inspired by the core of Onyeani's text. Look at your own daily economic habits and really ask yourself, are you trapping your dollar like a spider to build long-term generational wealth, or are you simply passing it along to be caught in someone else's web? It's a highly challenging question about consumerism, ownership, and mindset, and it leaves us with a lot to unpack about how economic systems truly function. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. We'll see you next time.